Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
And good morning. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. And we start with a prominent Indiana political leader calling for a 9/11 style commission to investigate the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. Lee Hamilton led the commission that investigated the 2001 terrorist attacks in New York City and Washington, D.C. He's now calling on Congress to create a similar bipartisan group for the siege at the U.S. Capitol that briefly stopped the certification of the presidential election. His letter to the president and leaders of Congress says the shocking and tragic assault on January 6th on the U.S. Capitol requires thorough investigation to ensure that the American people learn the truth of what happened that day. And now let's welcome in former Congressman Lee Hamilton. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for taking some time. You were the vice chair of the 9/11 Commission. Why is it important to have a similar commission look at the January 6th insurrection?
Well, January 6th was a tragic day for America. Our country was badly wounded that day. We had an assault on our system of government, on the institution of the Congress, and we must understand what happened, why it happened as best we can, and of course, most importantly, to think of things we need to do to make sure it does not happen again. When you have an event of this magnitude and scope and tragedy, it's important that we understand it so that we can fix it.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to do.
Congressman, what would you hope that committee will find? What answers would you like to hear?
Well, all kinds of questions come to my mind. Why did it happen? What were the vulnerabilities of the Congress? My goodness, you would think we would be able to protect the United States Capitol, the symbol of our country in a way, and of our Republican democracy.
Right.
And I think it left a shock with the American people that this kind of thing could happen.
Certainly.
So we need to understand these events and try to avoid them.
Congressman, 9/11 was an outside attack by an international terrorist group. With so much political division about the January 6th incident, can a commission actually get a bipartisan answer, or answers, plural?
It all depends. It all depends on the quality of the people that are chosen to serve on the commission. We can do it, of course. We've done all kinds of investigations over the period of the centuries in this country. Some good, some not so good, some probably failures. But I have a lot of confidence in our ability to do this if we approach it properly.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? That means obviously you got to have the right people. You've got to have people that are serious, bipartisan, put aside partisan ideologies, determined to get the truth to what happened. And you've got to resource things properly. You can't do this on the cheap.
Yeah.
In the 9/11 Commission, we had 70 staff members, millions of dollars spent to do it right. If you're going to do this on the cheap, if you're going to do it by just appointing anybody, don't bother. But if you're going to do it right, it can serve the country in a very valuable way.
Sounds to me like they need a Lee Hamilton on that committee. Do you believe, in your opinion, that the Capitol siege was an act of domestic terrorism, sir?
Well, yes, I think I would so classify it. I'm not a terrorist expert by any means, but my goodness, what a shocking thing for me at least, and I think for the American people generally, to watch on television as you saw the people storming the Capitol building. Well, I've walked up and down those halls hundreds and hundreds of times, and to see it desecrated and people breaking windows and doors and barging into the Capitol, the floor of the House and the Senate is just shocking.
Yeah, scary
Beyond-
sight.
And so, yes, I want to see it thoroughly investigated.
Sir, you served on Congress for 34 years. You watched what happened in the 2020 election and what happened on January 6th. What changes would you like to see on Capitol Hill?
Well, my first thoughts go to the law enforcement, Capitol Police. They're the ones that showed a vulnerability. And so I want to see measures taken to make sure the police are adequately trained, armed, there are enough of them, and they are fully resourced to repel any kind of a Capitol attack that may come on the Capitol itself. Now, beyond that, it's quite important that we probably take a look at strengthening the Congress, too, while we're at it. And to include a broader effort to build trust and confidence in that institution. Our country has been wounded. The full accounting of events and identification of measures to strengthen the Congress will make our country heal and safer.
Well said. Former Congressman Lee Hamilton, thank you for taking some time and joining us today, sir.
Nice to be with you. Thank you.
Take care. Capitol Police are asking that National Guard troops continue their assignment protecting the Capitol. It had been expected to end this month. Congressional hearings have pointed blame for planning and response to the siege at several different agencies. Our All Indiana Politics team talked with Congressman Andre Carson about what he's learned from those hearings.
So many warning signs were missed or even ignored. And I think that this lack of communication comes as no surprise, certainly to me. I heard about the threat against my own life about a week after it happened from a reporter who was covering this person's detention hearing. I strongly urge the Capitol Police and law enforcement in general to take these threats very seriously from right-wing extremists. We need to take right-wing domestic extremism more seriously in general. It's the biggest threat to our national security. I know I'm going to keep focusing on this priority through my role on the Intelligence Committee. And I think that hopefully these hearings will unearth our need to provide necessary funding to strengthen internal controls within the Sergeant at Arms and Capitol Police infrastructure.
Meanwhile, a security review ordered by Speaker Nancy Pelosi after January 6th is calling for adding more than 1,000 new Capitol Police officers. It would also add retractable fencing around the Capitol. Coming up, the riots in downtown Indianapolis. The details inside a scathing review of the city's planning and response and why one police leader says the report throws officers under the bus. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we turn back to the city of Indianapolis and that scathing report about the city's response to the downtown riots. We touched on it briefly last week. Well, the 42-page independent report lists several areas where the city and IMPD failed in the May 29th and 30th riots. Among the findings, a lack of planning, communication, and coordination, inadequate training for officers, and that the actions of the officers escalated tensions with the crowd. The report also says the failure of IMPD to develop a strategic plan focused on de-escalation, coupled with other factors discussed below, likely contributed to continuing escalation of tensions between police and marchers during the course of the Friday evening and again on Saturday. Now, the report has a total of 7 recommendations, including improved training for officers, better internal planning and communication, using de-escalation techniques instead of what they call disorder control, and avoiding the use of aggressive posture by officers. Now, Mayor Joe Hogsett's office declined the invitation for the mayor to join us this week to talk about the report. But a statement from his office says, quote, Indianapolis witnessed unprecedented mass protests in support of racial justice. However, in this same moment, as emotions rose and tensions climbed, Indianapolis also experienced instances of rioting, looting, and violence. Hogsett also said the city has already made some changes since June 1st of last year, and that they value the conclusions made by this report, respect the tremendous amount of work that went into this important document, and will work to implement the recommendations. Meanwhile, the head of the Indianapolis Fraternal Order of Police says he feels the report is a cover-up for the failings of police and city leaders, and that it throws the officers on the street under the bus. Sierra Hignite has that part of our coverage.
The independent report looking into IMPD's riot response says their approach prompted the protests to turn violent, that their actions after things started to get out of hand was not well managed or executed.
Our police officers feel like they are absolutely thrown under the bus by the political structure in the city, and that this was simply to generate political cover for the people who made poor decisions or failed to make any decisions at all.
FOP's Rick Snyder says the blame for the response should not be on police.
It said that the police officers were unprepared, undertrained, and lacked communication. What the true facts are of what occurred is the ones that were unprepared, undertrained, and lacking communication were the politicians and the decision makers, not the police officers.
Snyder calls IMPD one of the most highly trained police forces in the country. Officers are cited in the report as saying they felt they were not prepared and that there was no clear direction given.
What was written in that report really is a very myopic view, and in many instances is not only not what the person said, but in some instances, the complete opposite of what they said.
The report states officers were told to stand down and allow the crowds to congregate at the circle, which Snyder says resulted in a riotous and violent situation.
The problem wasn't the training. The problem was not that we were overwhelmed. It was that our well-trained, well-qualified officers were ordered to stand down, work from a compromised posture.
The report specifically mentions officers dressed in riot gear as a contributing factor to the violent behavior in the crowd over the weekend.
OSHA regulations mandate that in that scenario, our officers are required to wear that equipment.
Thank you, Sierra. Snyder also tells us that adding a curfew and other restrictions had the biggest impact on preventing another night of violence. The review does address the curfew issues. The report says one of Governor Eric Holcomb's emergency orders on COVID-19 prevented the city from issuing a curfew on Saturday, and that the order was amended to allow the curfew on Sunday. All right, coming up, voting rights and COVID relief. The fights on Capitol Hill with our political insiders next on All Indiana Politics. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday as we welcome back Republican Whitley Yates and Democrat Brian Gaddy. Good to see you both. Let's start with COVID. There's been a lot of back and forth, Brian, about that relief bill. Your thoughts on how this has played out?
Well, President Biden has definitely done a great job with getting it through, along with Speaker Pelosi. We're getting it through the House, and now it's in the Senate, and you've got to work out the different Senate factions. We've obviously got to deal with Senator Manchin from West Virginia. He is against the checks, the $2,000 checks. So we've had to negotiate it down to $1,400. Obviously, the $15 minimum wage has been taken out. But then you've got the other side, the Republican side, that's just saying, hey, it needs to be a lot smaller. It seems like they haven't learned their lesson from the Great Recession. When we have these different packages, when the economy is down, you must have a bigger package in order to get the economy back up again. And I think President Biden understands that. The Democrats understand that. So I do think it's going to pass, and I do think the President Biden will be signing it into law here shortly.
So, Whitley, how do you answer the claim that polls show Republicans around the country support the bill, but Republicans in Congress aren't listening to them?
I think that that's a hard dichotomy. I think that the Republicans in Congress are looking at this from a larger scale, more macro scale. The bill has a lot of pork barrel spending. I deemed it more pork than city barbecue. And so when we're looking at what's best for the country, is it what's best for the country right now, or what we need to do to help prop up businesses 10 and 12 and 15 years down the line? I think the truth is the American people are waiting for their bank accounts to be stimulated. This was a promise of the current administration, and it hasn't happened yet. And so while they did throw in minimum wage and some tunnels in San Francisco, I'm not quite sure why that was in there. That's going to cause a lot of this to be held up. And the truth of the matter is the American people get the short end of the stick.
And I'll get to you in a second, Brian, but Whitley, would you say that this is a loss for President Biden for not getting everything he wanted and promised?
I think you have to be careful what you're promising politically to make sure that you can push it policy-wise for the people. Now, if he would have done what the American people were expecting and sent the stimulus separate from this bill, I think that he would be in the better graces for the American people, to be honest, because I think, well, specifically in the Black community, there are just a lot of things that were promised that we're still waiting on, and we're not necessarily feeling like a priority right now.
Brian, 30-second response.
Well, there's no doubt about it that President Biden is definitely getting this, really working hard to get the stimulus package through. Obviously, he's still having to clean up former President Donald Trump's mess from the economy, from just coronavirus numbers out of control. So I really do think, given the fact he's been in the presidency less than 2 months, President Biden's doing a great job. And again, he's having to clean up a lot of what former President Trump did wrong. So I think he's doing a great job.
All right, let's move to H.R. 1, the elections bill that passed the U.S. House this week. It could do several things, and we'll put them up on your screen, including automatic voter registration, same-day registration in all 50 states, nonpartisan commissions for redistricting to try to avoid gerrymandering, and additional disclosure on so-called dark money donors. Whitley, I want to bring you back in here. Indiana's Attorney General has already said that he will sue if this thing is passed. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think it rips the authority-making powers granted in the Constitution to the states to be over the elections, and it really just, once again, here we are. I feel like it's an overreach of the government. It's federalizing the election process, which to me is unconstitutional. I don't think that if we are looking to make our elections freer and fairer, that limiting like some of these things, like no voter ID, so I can go register to vote, or someone can go and vote and say that they're Whitley Yates and not their ID isn't checked, and then when I show up to the polls, I can't, like, there's no way that for us to be able to make sure that the people who say they are who they are, that they're going to be able to vote. I think that there's a lot of issues. I think right now federalizing the election process is not the way to go, but helping states to make sure that they are able to have free and fair elections in all 50 states, helping the legislators who are in charge of that process should be what we're trying to do right now.
Right, a lot of people out there, though, say if this doesn't pass, it actually makes it harder for people to vote.
Where?
Brian,
I don't understand. I don't understand that logic. I don't get that logic. Maybe Brian can
maybe Brian can help. Yeah, Brian, enlighten us.
Well, the Republicans, just for some reason, our Republican friends always like to find a way of trying to keep people from voting. There's just no doubt about it that, they always talk about, well, if these people, get to vote, how do we know if they're not voting illegally? The numbers of voter fraud in this country are minuscule. It's very, very small, but yet our Republican friends always find a way of, if there's one case, and in fact, there was a case of voter fraud in Pennsylvania, and it was a Donald Trump voter. So Whitley, answer that for me. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the American people have a right to vote. We should be expanding the franchise in this country. We should be expanding opportunities for people to vote, not limiting the amount for the American people to vote. And it just seems like our Republican friends always love to find a way to keep people from voting. I don't know, maybe that's because their ideals aren't as good as our ideals in the Democratic Party, but we Democrats want people to vote. We're not afraid for the American people and Hoosiers to vote. It seems like
less than 30 seconds, Whitley. Your response quickly.
It's not about whether or not you want people to vote, but how do you make the American people feel secure about the process? In 2016, the Democratic Party didn't feel like the election was fair. So I find it very interesting now, after that, not to mention some other elections that you guys didn't feel was fair. And now all of a sudden we need to just let everyone vote, have ballot harvesting. There's no voter ID laws. You can register the exact same day. Just walk in.
I'm going to ask you guys to take this conversation offline right now because we got to go. Good conversation, folks. Good to see you. Thank you, Brian and Whitley. We'll be right back. All right, thank you for joining us for another edition of All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning, 9:30. You can also find our brand new All Indiana Politics podcast. It's part of the All Indiana Podcast Network at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.